Alrighty, I am here with Luke Looney of Good Boy Coating Epoxy Flooring. Luke, I appreciate you coming on today. You're the first person we've had in this specific industry, so excited to kind of hear some of the insights about it. Let's start with just the founding story, though, how you got started. Give us a little background into kind of what you were doing maybe before college, because I know you've always been in this sort of trade space, but how'd you go from where you were back then to being an entrepreneur?
Yeah, Garrett, thanks for having me on. So yeah, I got started in this when I was growing up. It actually came to be my neighbor down the street. So the guy that lived three doors down from me, his dad had grown a company to where it is now, working on national accounts across the country. Um, and I kind of started working there. It's kind of your summer job, when you're in high school. So I'd go, down to Kansas City, Kansas, and I start doing, just working in the warehouse the first summer, in the epoxy space. And then, I got out on the field with all the boys and I started working on these big manufacturing plants to food processing plants and kind of got my feet wet in the space at a rapid pace. And, it's intense labor, but I loved it. I was young and could do it. And so, yeah, the first time I went out in the field, I got in, one of the trucks and I got sent out to Ottawa, Kansas. And I was basically carrying mud and a wheelbarrow back and forth for about 10 hours straight. And that was my first day in the field. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's going to be a long summer. Um, but the intense labor kind of, made it fun and made it fun with the guys. And I liked the whole process of it. So kind of kept going, summer by summer. Worked at the Chiefs Stadium, worked at Lee Summit North High School. Just those 3 month projects I was doing throughout high school. And I was also on government wages, so I was making good money. You're making 15 grand a month or 15 grand a summer as a 17-year-old. So it was great. And then I went off to college at Mizzou, and there was some university work going on for my old boss, Dave Schlegel, who I'm speaking of. And I was working on some of his projects up there. And towards the end of college, I was like, oh, maybe I'll go down, to Phoenix and try and get into some development, commercial real estate stuff. Went down there and I didn't love it, but it was fun, go down there for a summer internship. But I kept thinking back to the epoxy world. And about March of my senior year, I was like, I'm going to do it. And I reached out to one of my cousins. He was a year older than me at Mizzou. And he had always been, entrepreneurial, driven. And I reached out to him. He was living in Dallas, Texas, working for AT&T. And I said, hey, here's the thing I want to start. You in or you out? He got his flight the next day and moved back to Columbia, Missouri, where his parents were living, and I was also still in school. So we started kind of planning, and I was like, you just need to go out and get on a floor. We don't need a plan. We can start, August, September, but let's get you on a floor and just get your hands dirty. So I actually got him a job at ECS, Dave Schlegel's company, and he worked there for 3 months on his hands and knees and just saw everything. And he was making really good money, and he kind of saw, the ins and outs of the operations. I think that's how you kind of need to start a company. You don't need to plan, the marketing, the sales. You kind of just need to know, hey, what are you actually selling? You're selling epoxy flooring, and this is like the commercial side of things. So we saw, the most detailed floors, from the best of the best in the industry. So he saw everything that summer. We got back to Kansas City about August 20th, and then we just started taking off from there.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I like there is like you don't need a plan to start, especially when you're at that age. And it's just like, hey, just get started, get to work, and you'll kind of figure it out. And I think especially with trades businesses, right? If you're starting, if you're reinventing the wheel, you obviously need to have some sort of plan as to like how is your value prop going to be different? How's your positioning going to be different? But with the trades, you really just need to get started. So I think that's a great point with, learning the trades. Let's talk a little bit about that first job that you had. How did you walk me through the process of you guys say, hey, we're going to do this on our own? What was it like to get that very first job?
Yeah, so the very first job happened to be a family friend. So obviously, yeah, young kids out of college, they're going to help us out. So we're like, hey, yeah, we're going to do your garage floor. We'll just charge you at cost. So we got the truck, we had the trailer, we got, some equipment, nothing crazy, but just kind of like a little starter package. So Nick and I went and did it. It happened to be one of the hottest days of the years in August. It was like 95 degrees, and usually you're supposed to lay the floor at, 70 degrees. But we went ahead and just did it. It took us about 2 days, and going through it, I was like, it was fun, but I was like, dude, it's crazy we're doing this right now, but we had to have everything down of, the mix ratios on the epoxy, to the cure times of how long you had to get it out on the floor because you're squeegeeing it out and you're back rolling it with a, 18-inch roller and it's hot as shit. So, you're going fast and you're also on spike shoes, which I wasn't that used to because I wasn't really on spikes when I was working at the past company. But um, you know, it was a great learning curve. We actually ended up doing the steps in that garage, I remember, and we went back and the steps were still sticky. So it never cured. So we were off on our ratios. I think it was a 2-to-1 mix and I was at like a 1-to-1. So like I never cured part A and part B. Um, so right there I was like, you got to be so careful in that, into things. The biggest thing is the mixer on the jobs. But no, ended up leaving that job. We tried to do the best we could. And it was just Nick and I laying it. But we left that job and was like, all right, dude, let's just keep reaching out to, everyone I knew in Kansas City. He was from Columbia, so he didn't have a ton of like network here. So I was just like, dude, let me just keep hammering people. Just people I knew, let's just do it for cheap and just get our hands dirty and just kind of start establishing that and then just work at nights to try and, get marketing, get different ideas flowing, get operations, see if we, want to bring on somebody and just we put that starting cost of, what we put down, we didn't take out any loans. We just put all the money we had that we made, together over high school and college. And we had enough money to, buy a truck, buy a trailer, buy equipment, buy tooling. So we weren't that in debt at all. I think we ended up borrowing like 3 grand, but that was about it. We had it paid off. But no, that was our first 6 months was kind of just reaching out to people we knew. And then we brought on my little cousin. He was about 3 years younger than us. And yeah, there's about 10 of us. So that was about 2.5 years ago. So you just had to put yourself out there and actually do the work yourself. I think people try and, point fingers when they start something. Um, and they want to be like the big boss and wear a collared shirt, which I think that's the last thing you want to do.
Mm.
Even now, I don't even want to be, pointing fingers. But obviously, I got to be selling to keep everyone busy because you're, providing food for these families. Um, if you don't have jobs lined up, your guys aren't working, so they're not making any money.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting thing in general with trades. When people start out, it's like, how much do you're talking about that first job of, man, this is difficult. You're doing everything yourself. And it's like, how much of that do you want to continue to do versus you want to grow the business to where you're not doing any of that? Like, how do you feel about that? How much in the day to day do you want to be versus focused on growth? How do you think about that?
No, it's a good point. I think I was talking to a guy yesterday actually who owns Empowered Electric. He's about 40 years old, but he grew his company to like 80 employees now, from nothing. But he said the biggest thing is take the best attribute from yourself, and just stick to that rather than trying to put people in that role. Like if you're really good at it, just stick with it. And I think I'm super well connected in Kansas City and just a good people person. So I don't think I'd ever want to be out of sales. Um, and don't get me wrong, I do love, messing with operations and like always kind of checking in on the guys, but that's gonna waste my time and take me away from sales. So I think that should be your main focus is figure out what you're best at and then, put people in place to let the company run itself.
Hmm. There is a piece of that where ultimately, as you grow, like you said, he has 80 employees now. So much of what your business becomes and what your day to day becomes is managing people and managing
Right.
teams. I'm curious how you feel about that. You now have 10 people on your team. you're a young guy. I'm sure most of them are probably older than you. How has that been growing, managing, and operating a full team like that?
I think, yeah, that's always going to come in. That's always going to be present. You're always going to have to manage. You're never going to get away from that. But managing the guys, you got to find that one guy that's just going to be, all right, I'm going to lead these jobs. I'm going to, make sure, every single supply, every single bucket, paintbrush, like every little detail like that, everyone has it out on the, trucks. There's, the oil change is done. Like I don't have a full operations guy, but everyone kind of just chips in. But I kind of designate, who's going to do that. But you got to kind of have that one guy. So my main guy, Daniel, he's 10 years experience and he also is bilingual. So that was a big management obstacle that we struggled with. So we had to I probably speak, 25% Spanish every day. So you just kind of, you can get the point across to the Mexican boys. Like it's just kind of how it goes. And he basically translates for me. So if I'm going to put two guys on a job and they're both Spanish speaking, most of the time Daniel's going to go to the job first and he's going to, meet the client, or I'll send, English speaking person, because most of the time it's going to be English speaking customers if it's a
Right.
residential job. Commercial job, sometimes it doesn't even matter. I'll talk to the guy on the phone. I'm like, my guys are showing up. He's like, yeah, they're here. They're already working. So, but I think a big thing is like, yeah, getting the guys to the shop in the morning, if it's 6 a.m. or if it's like 7 a.m., if a job can't start till a certain time, because you're going to be paying these guys hourly. Um, you might have one guy on salary, but kind of going from that 8 to 10 to 15 range is probably the biggest struggle because you can't really hire somebody and supplement their salary, full time until you're, at that capacity of like 15 people total. Like 10 guys, yeah, you probably could hire somebody, but then you're taking away, from yourself.
Hmm.
So kind of that little in between mix, like you kind of got to wear all the hats for, the first 3 years, I'd say.
I saw a LinkedIn post that you guys put out about sort of like in shop training and how important that is, where you're basically not waiting until you're on the job site to make the mistake. And you guys, it was something like you set up a little area in the shop where you could show the guys how to do that. Talk about that a little bit. I think that's a great point that I haven't seen that much of. You have this specialized skill, and putting the time and effort in to train them and how that sort of pays off on the end deliverable.
Yeah, no, that was actually Nick's idea. I'm more of a just kind of a rusher sometimes, and like let's just get to the job. Like, screw it, we'll figure it out when we're out there. So if you keep doing that, and there's probably six different installs we do on the flooring side, from polished concrete to a full epoxy flake system to a urethane cement. There's a bunch out there, but no. So there's these different systems. So like an airplane hangar. That's probably one of the hardest, floors to lay out because it's a straight glossy one color floor. So you can't really hide, any blemishes in the floor. So we went and did a job. It was 16,000 square feet out in Columbia, Missouri. Massive, massive plant on the north side of Columbia, and we were laying the final coat. And we were checking the humidity. The humidity was fine because you can't really lay it, outside of 60 to 80 degrees. Um, but the humidity kind of rose up to about 90, 100 degrees. So I was like, damn, there's lines in the floor. It must be the humidity. But we were already laying the floor, and there was about 12 guys on this job. Brought in some subs, and there was some lines in the floor, but we couldn't stop because we already had material on the floor, and we just had to keep going.
Mm.
And so we went back, and I was like, I don't think it was the humidity levels. So got the humidity down to exactly what it needed to be. And we ended up having to redo the whole floor. Sanded the whole 16,000 square feet down. Maybe cost us 10 to 15 grand of, a mistake that, I didn't do a shop training, back to your point, that, you're on 16,000 square feet rather than, you do a little 10 by 10 area in the shop to really make sure the pigment's right and the the working times right, the temperatures. So all that comes into, planning. So, from there on out, we're like, we have to do shop training because we don't want to, make a mistake like that again when you're not
There's
fully
there's
educated.
so much specialized skill here that people don't really think of, right? When you walk into a garage or a shop and you see the floor, it's just there. Talk
Right.
a little bit about that. If you were to go back, or let's say you're talking to somebody who's just starting this business, it's you 2, 3 years ago. What are, maybe 3 to 5 things you would tell them of, hey, here's the things you need to get right. Here's the things that it took me a $15,000 mistake to learn. That's obviously one example, but can you give me a few more?
Um, Another example, we were down doing a brewery pickleball concept, like a fun place that we're doing the bathrooms and we're doing all the kitchens. And the temperatures were, I think it was probably 5 degrees outside. A huge snowstorm came in, and the building wasn't fully climate controlled, but there was big industrial heaters in there. But it was still pretty cold on the edge of the building. So we ran like cove base, which is, a radius cove on the, perimeter of the floor. And we laid it on a Monday. And I remember we came back and the interior part of some of the kitchen work and the bathrooms were cured, but the perimeter wasn't, that's touching the outside walls of the building. And we're like, damn, like it's still not cured. It's still like kind of tacky and sticky. So it wasn't fully like, cured. So I was like, talk to the mixer guy. I'm like, what'd you mix? Like, what were your ratios exactly? Like, which mix was, did you do 1 to 1? Did you do 2 to 1? Here's your part B, here's your part A, here's your part C. It's a 3 to 2, or is it a 2 to 1? Blah, blah, blah. So we went back through and everything was right. And I was like, damn. I was like, it's got to be I think it's getting tackier, as the day went on. But I figured out it was the temperatures of the perimeter of the building was so cold. It was going to take, triple the time for it to cure. So if I would have done it again, I probably would have waited for the building to be, fully heated. Because that's just delaying, labor hours. I'm sitting there. It was an out of town project, so I'm paying, time and a half. Um, so we ended up having to, stay 2 more days, which is more hotels. You're paying also for $30 a day for per diem for, meals and stuff like that. So, little mistakes like that, it's going to cost you, and you can't really put a change order in. I mean, you can sometimes, just depending on, the client. But like little things like that, that's going to cost you money that I was like, damn, like you got to be very prepared, especially out of town work like that. And just the climate control is very huge. That's like one of the first things I always ask, like, hey, is it going to be climate controlled? I need it to be 60 to 80 degrees in here. And then also, all I'm going to offer a moisture testing. If there's moisture in the slab, you're going to have to do another moisture vapor barrier or something like that. So like little, preparation stuff that, you don't even think of when it comes to this trade that you have to be exactly, you know, on point with. And there's some other things that comes with like joints and, the concrete's always going to move. So you got to have like flexible joint filler so the floor doesn't crack later on. Little things like that. Is kind of what to look out for when you're in the planning phase of like some of the bigger projects.
It seems like you said, most of it comes up to the preparation, right? And I had Michael Blake, which you probably know on. He has a roofing company and he's got experience in the Marines. And he was like, the biggest thing I learned from the Marines is sort of that mission planning stage of being able to show up on time with the right plan and the right equipment. And I think that can apply across the whole trades, but especially here. You mentioned out of town projects. I'm curious like, what was the first out of town project you did? And if you're talking to somebody who has a trades business and they've been local their whole life and they want to look at something out of town, how would you recommend going about that?
I think the out of town work, if you're in for this specific industry, you're going for, your main clientele is going to be like food processing, manufacturing. So that's going to be outside like of the Kansas City, area sometimes. I think the biggest thing is, building those relationships outside of Kansas City if you're trying to, you know, grow into a, if you're trying to just grow as a company, be on the commercial side. I saw the residential side, and yeah, it's fun. It's good. Like garages are easy now, and they're always going to look clean. They're always, keeping up with cash flow. But you got to go after like, the whales out there. At least you got to bid them, and you got to create those relationships because there's going to be more money out there, and you got to go out of town for my specific industry. Because everyone, this is a higher end, finish. Some people might just put tile in there, or they might just put, sealed concrete. They're not going to do a full, coating that we provide because people don't have the money for it. So you're going after a lot of, city work, government work. And then, our first summer we did schools. We went for all like rural areas because we know we can be competitive.
Mm,
Rather than the big dogs in Kansas City that can win those, the Lee Summit West High School renovation or like, Olathe School District. So we went for all like the rural areas where, we can be competitive. So it's just kind of what you want to do if you want to travel, um, and get to the commercial side quicker. That was kind of our outlook on it. And also at the end of the day, we wanted to keep everyone busy. So I'm going after jobs everywhere,
right.
small towns or in Columbia, if it's Wichita, Des Moines, Omaha. Um, that's just kind of what you have to do in our specific industry.
Right. How do you find these projects? Like, is there a site where people are posting bids? Like, what is the actual logistics behind finding a project in Des Moines?
Um, that was actually kind of a big thing for us was kind of using LinkedIn,
Mm,
and posting on social media. So
yep.
like for example, one job in Des Moines was a grocery store. It was actually a garage floor company that bid it, and they called us to come do the install. Um, so they didn't know how to install it. It was a thermal shock, industrial floor that was going to be about 3/8 inch thick. So they didn't know how to install it. So we went and installed it for them. So that was just one scenario
Mm,
of a grocery store. Um, we did an Omaha Tommy's Express car wash. I happen to just know the franchise owner, through connections, and he was putting another one in. And I got in front of him. He already had his main guy up there in Omaha that he's used, but he gave me a chance. Um, and then now I know that general contractor that was running that job. So he's, put me on the bid list.
right.
Like other, if it's like a restaurant work, they do a lot of retail stuff. So, just connections that way. And, the Columbia work, like 2 hours away, that was just kind of Nick, my partner. He's just well established there. His dad was in construction. So he just got really well established there. And it was also 2 hours away. And there's no floor guy over there. So we're like, let's just take over this market. There's a lot of university work. Columbia is growing. Um, it's kind of like the Des Moines, Omaha. Like they're both growing. There's not a ton of people up there.
Right.
So it's kind of the outlook. We didn't have a direct, kind of through LinkedIn, use your network, maybe some cold calls to like the bigger, food processing plants. We did, the animal rescue for the state of Iowa. That was our biggest job. Um, and that was just through a connection. Kind of, we ended up being the highest bid on it out of three, and we got it. But I think it's just building relationships and like getting people to like you, and then you'll be fine. So,
I think that's something people don't like when you think about LinkedIn, you think about connections in your network. A lot of times that is associated with like a white collar job. Like, if you're going to be in
right.
finance, you need to have, if you're going to be in insurance like me, you need to have a network. But it really is critical to the trades businesses. And would you say it's partnerships with general contractors is kind of the biggest thing? Like, if you could only focus on one partnership, or it doesn't even have to be a partnership, one sort of lever that you could pull, and you can't focus on anything else for sales, what would you focus on?
I think end to customer, because that's going to be your highest profit margin jobs. The general contractor is already working with the owner, and then they're finding subs, and they're going to find, some general contractors are going to be like, oh, I need the cheapest guy.
Right.
I can make more money myself. But you're always going to have general contractor jobs because it keeps your guys busy. But there's still good money depending on the GC. But I think the biggest client I go after is end a customer. So I'm going after maintenance, facility maintenance managers because they're
Mm.
maintaining these plants, like easier to clean, the concrete's bad, so it's causing tripping hazards, little things like that, that I kind of look out for. But yeah, and the customer for sure.
And I think probably a big part of that, you mentioned LinkedIn. How have you guys thought, how have you guys thought about social media and how you utilize that? I think one interesting thing with your industry, it's so primed to go viral where you have that sort of satisfying squeegeing out of the product. Like even if somebody doesn't give a shit about epoxy flooring, they still watch the video. I'm one of those
Right.
people.
Right.
How do you think about marketing? How have you guys used that to your advantage?
Um, we've been hard on marketing sometimes, like on social media. We'll go on like a, 2 month, posting, at least 3 times a week. We'll try to. Um, but it's hard to keep up with it because we have no one designated to it. If you're going to go out to a job, film, talk,
Right.
time you get to it. But I think the biggest thing for social media was putting your face on there, and doing a talking video and just showing your personality. And showing not just like, don't even like really talk about the job, almost like one like random little thing about the job that's like random that catches like someone's attention. Like, oh, it's got kind of funny, or like it's not like educational. That comes more so on the Instagram side. I think the Snapchat side actually has worked a lot for me too.
Hmm.
Just me using my personal name. Um, People just seeing like what we're doing. Like, say it's like a barn dominium. Like, oh, my uncle actually just built one. Would love to have you talk with him about floors, or like something random like that. It's like a random like high school friend, back, 6 years ago that randomly had you still on Snapchat. Like posting on there. Then I think the LinkedIn is just kind of, I think the pictures might do better on LinkedIn. Um, but videos do great too. I think it's just showing your face and talk.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great point there. I mean, I was had Molzer on the pod 3 weeks ago, and I mean he's the prime example of that, right? And what you mentioned there, you obviously mentioned putting your face on it and putting a sort of a face to the brand. That's key. But I also really like what you said about finding something random about a job that
Right.
people might not know or find interesting. And with trades, there's opportunities for that on pretty much every single project, right? So you can say maybe there's a piece of content about sort of the whole length of the project and it shows that start to finish, which people care about, right? When they see the start of it, they're going to naturally be curious about how it's finished. But there's also all the little spots in between where there's different stories happening. It's like, for example, you could say, okay, here's how when we do an out of town job, here's how we get everybody out to the hotel. So it's like every single part of that project has a
Yeah,
story that you can tell.
for sure.
I'm curious about sort of residential versus commercial. You've mentioned you're focusing on commercial more. It's higher ticket. How do you kind of think about some of the trade-offs between which one to emphasize?
Um, I think you're always going to have the residential, for us, probably for us, unless you're massive and you have national accounts and you're the preferred installer, which can be the case. I think residential for us is, you want to, family friends are going to reach out, so that's a job. You don't even have to go find it. And referral work. That also keeps up with our cash flow. So, you're getting paid right away, you're not getting paid 30, 60, 90 days after the job on the commercial side. Um, and then, residential can also be a repeat work, kind of like a general contractor can, or um, like restaurant work. If someone's open
Hmm.
multiple restaurants, they're probably going to use us on the next one. But I think residential, if you find a home builder, um, they're going to use you on every single home build, and especially the new ones. They're building 4 to 5 car garages. So that's a lot of square footage. It's almost treated as a commercial job. Um, which we kind of started doing our commercial systems on the residential side to separate us from the garage franchise guys. So like very high end finish, has a radius cove on the edge. Like no one really does that. And actually, I learned that from my old boss because he was the only one that did that on the garage floor side, and that's why he had so many builders keep coming back to him because no one else did it. So
What? So explain that to me a little bit more.
Yeah, so you're gonna have like you have your garage and then you have your like concrete walls on the edges, you know?
Yep.
You have
Yeah.
like your stairs. So like the edge where it meets at a 90-degree angle, we're doing like a little radius cove in there. So
Mm.
like cleaning out your garage, like it can just get washed out clean, stuff like that.
Ah.
So adding in that little detail, we just kind of kept going on that. And yeah, so residential to commercial, I just think you got to go commercial to be higher ticket, and you got to be able to build your brand awareness and like be recognized by the city. And if you want to go after stadium work, plant work, that's what you got to do to really be recognized, to win some of these jobs. So
Right.
yeah.
With that, obviously comes more complicated operations. Let's talk about that. How do you manage operations? You've got a team of 10. I'm sure you have, a couple projects going on at one time. What does your sort of operational system look like? And I guess maybe just walk me through like one specific project of what the operations look like on that from bid to job finished.
Yeah. Yeah, so kind of the breakdown of it. So say you go bid a job, throw your bid in, and the guy it can go two different ways. The guy can call you and like, hey, you won the bid. You don't even look at the job. You just have the plans. It might be a new development. Or, it's a renovation, you're gonna go walk the job. So say you go walk the job and you look at the floor, you walk it with this project manager, you get what you need, you get pictures, ask some questions, go back to your office and you put together a bid. I might get a couple like bids from, different manufacturers on the epoxy side. I'm like, hey, can you be a little more competitive on, this pricing from my primer? Like it's 45 a gallon. Can we be a little bit lower?
Mm.
Um, so I might get pricing on that and see who can be more competitive. Um, and then from there, I'll give, the client two options unless it's spec'd for a specific, you know, floor. And they'll get back to me. So say I win it and I book it out, I schedule it, I make sure, we have enough time if it's a bigger one. And then, when it comes time around, I typically like to, if it's over 5,000, if it's over 10,000 square feet, I kind of like to ship the product directly to the site. So it'll show up on a pallet, at probably the second day of the guys being there. So say it's Monday. Usually I have everyone meet at the shop at, 6:30. Get whatever truck's going out to that specific job, get it fully, dialed in. I'll try and have it the week before, but say it's chaotic and no one gets back until Friday or Saturday from work. Everyone will kind of chip in, make sure we have everything, go through, the list of things we need from supplies to equipment, um, to tooling and stuff like that. And then they'll head out to the job and I try and get them out of the shop by 7, get to the job at 8. They get there, my main guy, I'll end up probably meeting them there to walk through the job with my main guy, and then he'll walk through it with, the main superintendent on the job, get to know him, and we'll kind of walk through it, and we'll kind of get the plan together, go through the timeline, and they'll just start prepping. Guys will start hand grinding on the edges, and then you'll have your main guys. If there's one or two big grinders, set up your vacuums, hook them up to the grinders, and you just start, grinding the floors. And that's just kind of the first, couple days. And then you kind of start going into the coatings of your first coat, your second coat. You might have a cove base in there. But you're just kind of planning. And then I'm kind of checking in, you know, probably once a day. But now I'm kind of trying to be more hands off to kind of let them do their thing. And sometimes I'll have to go jump on the job and be, hands and knees, like, which I don't mind at all. But kind of check in and then we'll end up finishing the job and I'll go check it out and talk to the client, make sure he's happy. If there's anything that we need to go over, I'll go over it with my main guy to make sure he knows for next time. And then we'll close out the job and I'll send the invoice over and, I might get paid 30 days later. And usually I kind of like to do a follow-up email with that client. And then what's been working is I like to write a handwritten letter, thanks to Bob Pascuzzi, as you know, which goes a long way when a guy gets a handwritten letter. just saying, hey, thanks for the opportunity. Um, we're a young, growing company, so appreciate if you have any more work down the road. So that's kind of the basis of it, and then we'll go on to the next week. And kind of during that job, I'll have maybe a smaller job going on, like three-car garage or small office job that two guys are on or three guys. I usually have six guys on my commercial side going. Um, but that's it. You're kind of running two crews, one residential and one commercial crew. So you
Hmm.
have the residential crew maybe do 2 to 3 garages a week, and then you have your commercial crew, just doing that main big job.
That's great. I literally just put a thank you letter to Bob in the mailbox this morning, about an hour ago. So that's kind of funny. Well, I appreciate you coming on. What is kind of the next phase? Like, where do you see this going? Maybe like a short term, but what's the ultimate vision for Good Boy?
I'd say to grow Kansas City up to, I want to hire, the goals this year is I hire 2 salespeople and an operations full time, and kind of, looking at the company from afar by the end of the year. And then we've had a couple people reach out about franchising, but we're kind of still working through that. So yeah, I think getting, Kansas City fully built, hopefully probably having, 3 more installers, 3 to 4, 2 more salespeople in operations. So probably be up to, 16, 17 people by the end of the year, maybe 20. But build Kansas City and then, see if Dallas is kind of the main one that's been getting triggered these last couple months. If that's a franchise route or if they want to do more of a commercial route. But kind of that's in the planning phase, and we'll just kind of see what happens. But excited for the new year.
Awesome. I think we could have a whole conversation about the franchise route. I was curious if that was in the cards at all, but we'll save it for another time. Luke, where can people find you? And then who do you want reaching out? You mentioned you're looking to hire people. You mentioned you work with some GCs, homeowners. Where can they find you, and who do you want to reach out?
Yeah, reach out always on LinkedIn. I'm always on there and always comment on our posts. And if you're looking to work, yeah, hit me up. If it's install side, if it's operations, if it's sales side, or if you just kind of want to work anywhere, let me know. So reach out on social media, LinkedIn, or if you have my number. So I appreciate
Perfect.
it.
All righty. Thank you, Luke. Bye,
Yeah,
everybody.
thank you.